Growing up here in this Kansas, Missouri area and listening to students over time, it's not uncommon to hear the notion of Missouri is boring, Kansas is worse. Have you been on I-70 driving through Kansas? Have you driven to St. Louis? All we have is cows. All we have is farms. There's nothing to do. I'm bored. We've all heard it, most likely, especially, when we have individuals who come in from other parts of the United States or the world. Maybe this is why, this is one of my favorite parts of discussing the Civil War is because Missouri and Kansas, knowingly or unknowingly, wind up smack dab in the middle of this thing, and arguably is one of the primary catalysts or that match strike that results in the Civil War. So today we're going to be looking at what many historians refer to as bleeding Kansas. And there's a lot to unpack in this thing. And if you recall, first we started with Texas. That was ingredient number one. They got annexed. They became part of the United States. They're a slaveholding state. Right. Then we went into the Compromise of 1850, which said California comes in as a free state. The Fugitive Slave Act gets changed to be more strict. Washington, D.C. doesn't have slaves anymore or doesn't allow slave trading, right? So that's the compromise, really, of 1850. And also that New Mexico and Utah territories have the ability to choose themselves through popular sovereignty on whether or not they're going to be slaveholding territories. Remember, popular sovereignty means the public or the population is the one who votes and chooses on what happens. That's super important to understand what's getting ready to take place in Kansas. Now, while all this is going on with Texas, California, Utah, New Mexico, the United States still continues to rapidly expand. It's almost like we have two sides trying to give and take, get this property so it's free, get this property so it's slave. It's almost like a bidding war within inside the own country, right? Well, Kansas is sitting in the middle of the United States, just smack dab in the middle of it, and it's a territory. It really hasn't been expanded on much. It hasn't necessarily been seen as a state yet. However, that's getting ready to change and change rapidly. Inside Kansas, the people of Kansas were given popular sovereignty, saying that you will decide, you as a state, you will decide whether or not you're a slaveholding territory. Well, the populace, the people of Kansas, for the most part, wanted a free territory. All right, please note, we have the state, territories right below it. So we're at territory level. Think Puerto Rico. So Kansas is sitting back saying, coming around going, yeah, we want to be a free territory. We're pretty sure about that. But there's some things to consider. One, they're right next door to Missouri. Missouri is not a free state. Believe it or not, of the things you've heard, Missouri is not a free state. Cities and different areas had the option to be free or slave, but the state itself was a slave state. Worth noting for sure. So there's pressure coming in from this side. Colorado's not a state yet. It's just this foreign territory thing, right? So there's no pressure over there. The other thing is Kansas sits above the Missouri Compromise line. This line was drawn to say anything above this line would be a free state minus Missouri. And anything below it would be a slaveholding area. So Kansas is set up saying we should be free. But that popular sovereignty piece is really where the party gets started. Because the limitations of being a quote-unquote citizen in Kansas was pretty lenient. So, meaning this, if I'm in Missouri and I want Kansas to be a slaveholding territory or state, and I know that popular sovereignty says that whoever has the most votes, that's what happens, then what's keeping me from running over to Kansas from Missouri and stacking the votes in my favor and just saying, oh, I'm a Kansas citizen, it counts, right? And that's exactly what happened. So Missourians rush over to Kansas in mass amounts to try to persuade or to push the votes in favor of a slaveholding territory. Well, needless to say, the good people of Kansas wanted nothing to do with that. So Kansas reacts, and they try to kick them out, send them back to Missouri. One way or another, a few things happen that are pretty important. First of all, Lawrence, Kansas, that's the home of Kansas University, Lawrence, Kansas gets burned to the ground. That's number one. Number two is a guy by the name of John Brown. John Brown had a beard that's like here. And if you want to talk crazy, hello, John Brown. Historians argue on whether or not like John Brown was like the key abolitionist of the time, or if he was absolutely insane. Because John Brown was a firm advocate and believer of, in order to establish our country as a free country, there should be violence. And so John Brown went on a killing spree inside Kansas, chopped up some folks that weren't actually slaveholders but were favorable for the South, killed them in cold blood out in Kansas. It was quite the big to-do. He also led a revolt at Harper's Ferry in Virginia before that, revolting against slavery as well. John Brown's got a unique history of doing questionable events. Maybe that's the best way to put it. Eventually, he is hung. That's his cause of death. But John Brown also like really stokes the fire in Kansas, also saying, I'm here to free this state. Like, they're not going to be a slaveholding area. Like, this is going to be a free territory, free state, and we're going to bring back the Union, and we're going to get rid of the slaveholders, and that's going to be that, and we're going to do it with violence. Okay. Well, of course, all this winds up making it to Congress. And in Congress, in the United States, Washington, D.C., believe it or not, this whole debacle gets violent and violent fast. And we're talking, believe it or not, congressional members, representatives and senators, get to the point to where they beat each other with their staffs, canes, whatever you want to call them, literally on the floor of Congress, like during session, getting violent in session because people can't agree on what to do with Kansas. So it's a very polarizing moment. You've got these people that are vehemently about Kansas will be free. That's the way it's going to be. The end. You've got people flooding in from Missouri saying, no, it's going to be a slaveholding territory. It's going to get along with Missouri. That's the way it's going to be. And it's splitting across the party lines as well. It's getting into Congress. It's just boiling all over the place. And when violence breaks out in Congress, the newspapers get a hold of this and they distribute it everywhere. Well, now people are becoming extremely polarized. The person I voted for was nearly beaten to death because he stood against slavery. Well, this person, on the other hand, was speaking on behalf of Southerners and behalf of slaveholders, and the so vital importance of it. They have my support. So really what happened in Kansas ends up becoming like one of the most polarizing pieces to really kickstart the Civil War. And to give you perspective, like a lot of this is happening around 1859. The first shots of the Civil War are going to be in 1860. So Congress at this point, they've had multiple compromises, the Missouri Compromise of 1820, the Compromise of 1850. They've worked on what's called the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which leads to this Bleeding Kansas bit. Folks weren't as interested in Nebraska as they were Kansas because Nebraska is far enough north that a lot of people said it's just going to be a free territory. Just let it be. Kansas, on the other hand, sitting on the border of the compromise lines and next door to Missouri was a hot topic, especially with like rail routes and things along those lines as well. So really, by the time Bleeding Kansas is done, the lines have already been drawn. Violence has already taken place. Some argue that really the first shots or the first act of violence in the Civil War was John Brown killing people in Kansas because they were pro-slavery. It's a mess. And there is no right answer at this point. A lot of people in Congress are starting to realize in 1859, it doesn't matter what we do, we're going to war. In 1860, there's a presidential election. In that election, a man by the name of Abraham Lincoln gets voted in. And that arguably is probably the final nail in the coffin. Because when Abraham Lincoln is voted in and you look at who voted where, like which states voted for who, nobody in the South voted for Abraham Lincoln. But since there's more people in the North, the votes go in favor of him. And when that happens, the people of the South finally decide our votes don't matter. Our voice isn't heard. They're going to destroy us. Let's make our own country. And so then we wind up with the first shots being fired and the southern states starting to declare their secession and forming their own country called the Confederate States of America. And there we have the beginning of the Civil War. So really, when we look at Bleeding Kansas, what we're looking at in a lot of ways is the final straw. This is the last grasp. This is this is it. This is the moment where we've gone from the politics and politicians trying to fix it with compromises to this is now a violent event. Humans aren't going to listen. We're going to go to war with each other, right? So bleeding Kansas. So believe it or not, Kansas itself, the state currently, but really the territory holds a lot of importance at this time, and Missouri plays a part in it also. Missouri plays a huge part in it. Also know that the militias that fought back and forth between the two states, the historical myth, rumor, legend of it is one of the militias was named the Tigers and one of them was named the Jayhawks, and they fought at each other. And that's why we have the border wars between University of Missouri, who are the Tigers, and University of Kansas, who are the Jayhawks. There's a lot of speculation between them. So understand that historically, there is a rivalry that runs deep between these two states. So even when a student or an individual says, man, these states are so boring, they have nothing. First of all, we've got some cool stuff. We got some weird stuff. We got some cool stuff. Second of all, though, they are the backbone to the cause of the Civil War. Like, even though not a lot of battles are actually fought in these two states, they really are the final straw that ignites, or the final match that ignites the Civil War and actually turns it into what we see through our perspective of history. So there you go. Bleeding Kansas. It was a real thing. John Brown was a polarizing person. He is very intriguing to listen to and read about because many people are still on the fence on, is he good? Is he bad? Like, is he an anti-hero? What is he exactly? Because like, oh, cool, you don't want slavery. Well, that's good. But you're butchering people up with a sword and an axe. That's kind of frowned upon. So something to consider with John Brown. So walleye fish and chips, bleeding Kansas. Now we've had the annexation of Texas. We've had the Compromise of 1850. We've had bleeding Kansas. There's one piece or one ingredient left for the Civil War. Just one. And that's the presidential election of 1860. Once that's over, game on. So it's important to know these are these pieces that we had to have in place in order for the Civil War to actually kick off in the United States. So ta-da, bleeding Kansas. Another little factoid about U.S. history.